Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Tarot, the tarot channel that is dedicated to the tarot geekery. We are on a voyage of discovery through the Major Arcana, looking at each card in turn at its number, its name and its symbolism. We have arrived at card number 12, the Hanged Man. So make yourself a cup of tea, pull out your decks and get ready as we explore the Hanged Man together. Welcome back, guys. So today we are doing the 12th card of the Major Arcana, which is called the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man can cause some concern in those people that are new to the tarot or have just had a tarot card reading from a tarot card reader and this crops up on the table. That is because of its striking imagery of a man hung upside down by one leg, as well as the name Hanged Man. It can imply self-harm or some form of corporal punishment if you don't know this card and its meaning. There are several cards in the tarot that do that. For example, the next card that we're doing, Death or the Unnamed Arcana, the Devil and the Tower. So when those cards come up, a tarot card reader can be quite excited because they have a lot of symbolic meaning, but they are also very aware that the person that they're reading for may try to interpret those cards themselves and jump to conclusions before we get a chance to. So it's always very important that when it gets laid down on the table, you allay those fears as fast as you possibly can, even if that is just to say, don't worry about this card, we will come to talk about it in a second, but it may look a bit concerning to you, but it's not. Anyway, so let's jump onto this card. For those people new to the channel, I use two different decks to illustrate my videos, and this will be the 12th time for most people to hear this, so feel free to phase out for the next 2 minutes. So let me show you. These are the two tarot decks that I use. This one is the Tarot de Marseille deck, which is a French style or tradition of tarot, famous, most popular between the 1600s and the 1700s. This particular deck is based on the 1760s Nicholas Conver deck, and it is by the restorer and tarot writer Chris Hadder. This deck is called the Veritable Tarot de Marseille, and there is a link of it below in my description. But when I use this deck, I am talking about the French school of tarot called the Tarot de Marseille. Here is the 1909 Rider-Waite-Smith deck by the artist Pamela Coleman Smith. You can see her signature here, commissioned by a man called Arthur Edward Waite. Waite was involved in a lot of mystery schools, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and this tarot deck has an awful lot of the symbolic teachings and Kabbalistic teachings of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn hidden inside it. Quite a lot of modern tarot is based on this deck because it became like the standard deck to read, so most people learn with this deck. I use both decks because whatever deck you have in front of you will normally be based on one of these traditions, most likely Rider-Waite-Smith, but more and more decks are being based on the Marseille. So hopefully by including both of these, I have covered most of the bases. There is obviously some historical tarots before this, and there's an awful lot of tarots up here. So there may be a tarot that you have in front of you that isn't kind of based on one of these traditions, and that is normally because the artist or designer has decided to step outside of these traditions and create something new. Everything I say in these videos will still apply to that tarot deck, but some of the finer details that I point out won't necessarily be covered. For example, I might mention the 6 cut-off points, and it might not be on your tarot. So that covers both of the cards that I will be using. Let us return to that card, and welcome back to those people that have heard that 12 times. We are going to first talk about the numerology because it should be relatively simple. As we said in the numerology of previous videos, numerology kind of deals with the 1 to 9 very detailed, and then everything afterwards is a reiteration of those numbers. So here we've got the 12th card, which is 1, 2, 12. So we plus the 1 and 2 together using Theosophic addition, or just addition, and that equals 3. So the numerology of this tarot card is the same as the number 3, which is the Empress. You can also see this as the second iteration of the number 2 because you've got 1 before 2. Like this is the 1, the second kind of iteration of 2, like the second level. So the first level would literally be the 2, and this is the second level down, 1, 2. And then 2, 2 would be the third iteration of the number 2, 22. So you can see it in both. You can see references here quite clearly to the High Priestess, if you were to take it as the second iteration of 2, because you've got the 2 pillars that you see in the High Priestess, the Jachin and the Boaz of the High Priestess, especially in the Rider-Waite-Smith, but it's a little bit secretive and hidden in the Tarot de Marseille. So you can see this as a second iteration of 2, and you can see this as the number 3. So look at both of those, and that numerology you can find in those videos on the High Priestess and the Empress on my channel, but I will be recording a separate numerology video that will have those all in it, so that is all in one place for you guys, so that you don't have to keep jumping between 2 or 3 videos. The only other thing on numerology that I want to mention is that 12 can also be seen as 6 plus 6, or 6 times 2. So the number 6 becomes also slightly important. 6 was the Lovers card, and sometimes people say that this figure is the man that's in the Lovers card. And if you remember in the Lovers video, we said that that man was also the Magician. So this is also the Magician and the guy in the Lovers. We can see that number 6 inside the card because if we count these cut off stumps, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 2 times 6, which is 12. So you can also see the number 6 in this card quite obviously. 12 is highly factorial. It has an awful lot of factors and ways of making 12. So 3 times 4, for example, 2 times 6. All of those can be included in numerology in some way. But I think the main ones for this card is 2, the 3 and the 6. Cool. So that is a bit about the numerology of this card, and for the rest of the numerology, wait for the numerology video or go and reference back to my earlier videos on the 2 and the 3 and the 6. So let us look at the title of this card. In French it's Le Pendu, which does literally translate to the Hanged Man or the Hanged. This is, I sometimes see this word pendu similarly to pendulum or pendant, things that are suspended or hung. You know, pendulum is obviously a weight on a piece of string. Pendant is traditionally like you know, this can be called a pendant, something that hangs around the neck. So this is linked to those kind of English words of pendant and pendulum. So this kind of idea of suspended becomes quite important. And here we have the Hanged Man. It's quite interesting to say at this point that in my earlier videos I talked about the first septenary of cards, the 1 to 7, and this being the second septenary one, 8 to 14. The first septenary, if you remember, was about everyday people in medieval society. So we had the Empress, the Emperor, the Pope, the Papess, the Magician or the Juggler. In the second septenary, I said it was less about people. People might jump to thinking that this is a person because it's called the Hanged Man, but it's more generic than that. We're not talking about a specific man like the Emperor or the Empresses, but we're instead talking about just a kind of an idea or a concept of the Hanged Man and what that symbolizes. So I'm kind of wanting just to make it very clear that this is not about a person as such, it's more about the concept. And one thing that people do say is that the imagery is very similar to the pittura infamante in medieval or Renaissance Italy. This roughly translates to kind of picture of defamation, and the idea of it was a kind of a painting that was based to shame someone. So the concept comes from, maybe you are trialing someone in high society over illegal finances or tax aversion or something like this, and the law goes to the limit it can do but can't really press any further. Part of the ruling could be a image painted very similar to this to represent the person that's caused the wrongdoing being shamed. This upside down is a kind of a version of shaming. So the person would be depicted like this, and there would be a list of all their issues and the problems and the unlawfulness that this person has caused, and these paintings would be put in public places for all to see, this public shaming. There are some kind of sketches for these paintings still in existence, but there's very few of these paintings because they were based to shame people, and I don't think people wanted to kind of keep them. So Botticelli was known to apparently paint some of these kind of shaming pictures. So there is a reference here to the pittura infamante, this tradition of shaming the unjust or the immoral, or especially if they're of high society or high standing. What's interesting here is that you've got someone in a position of shaming or maybe even punishment, but the facial position is not one of shame or of pain. This is a person that is in contemplation. And here, likewise, we almost have this halo to show saintship or martyrdom, and a very, very peaceful face once again. So this, in some ways, could be self-perpetuating. This is someone that has put themselves in this position to do something, to gain something. And the image here can be a reference to perhaps like an Odin type figure. If those are, some of you may be familiar with the idea and the story of Odin, who hung himself on the world tree for 9 days in order to gain something. He wanted to gain the meanings of the runes, the mysteries of the runes, which are the letters, but also the spells. So he gained mystical and magical mastery by hanging himself upside down on the world tree for 9 days. So this could be symbolic of that kind of act, that this person is hanging themselves as a form of sacrifice to get something better, and normally a spiritual enlightenment, hence the halo here. The other thing it can be a reference for is the idea of Judas. This is more obvious in other paintings, especially earlier cards, which sometimes have coins falling outside of the pockets of the hanged man. There's also a hint here because we've got these 6 either side stumps, which could refer to the 12 disciples of Jesus. So it could be a reference here to Judas. Now, Judas's death is a hotly debated subject in theology, because even in the New Testament there's 2 different versions of it, one in Matthew and one in Acts, that contradict each other. There's also references in a kind of apocryphal texts, including the so-called Gospel of Judas, of what his death kind of constituted as. Some say he went and hung himself. Other people say that he died spontaneously. There's a wonderful there is one that kind of circulated in ancient Catholic kind of folklore, that he kind of contracted some sort of disease or disorder where everything started swelling and he started smelling, and eventually he just burst and his bowels just gushed out. There's also some references to the fact that he used the 30 pieces of silver to buy a plot of land, which became known as the Field of Blood, I think. And he spontaneously burst, and his blood went over the field. Another reference, which is more in line with this tarot, is that after he sold Jesus out, he became very aware of his wrongdoing, and he tried to get rid of the silver, which no one would take because they saw it as blood money. So he decided to sacrifice himself, to hang himself, and he hung himself to death. All of those are... There's also... Which one is it? I can't remember the exact location of this story, but there's also one saying that Judas was quite worried and concerned about what he'd done, and he was also aware that Jesus was going to come back from the dead. So he went home and told his wife this, who was at that time cooking a chicken over a pit. And the wife laughed and said, Jesus is just as likely to raise from the dead as my chicken is to come alive again and dance. At which point the chicken apparently did come alive again and did a dance. So there's a lot of different kind of myths and legends around Judas's death. And this one, if you are seeing that as it's that self-punishment. It's the coins falling from the purse, the blood money dropping down, and him hanging himself. So one can see this as a reference to Judas. So it is about sacrificing or surrendering, the knowledge of wrongdoing and self-punishment for that reason. So those are the two kind of major myths around this card. Well, the three major myths: an image of shaming, like the Pittura Infamante, the Judas Iscariot, or the Odin on the World Tree, depending on how you want to interpret the card. There is an awful lot of hidden symbolism in the card, so let us take a look at it. Just whilst I get my drawing tablet working, this is the Pierre Madini deck, which is obviously a Tarot de Marseille deck. It is the one that I prefer to use here because I was using the suns for the first few, but the imagery wasn't very, very clear. So I've moved on to this. So let me just change my pen colour to something that will stand up on that. So here we go. So other than these 6 down here and these 6 down here, we also have this leg crossing here and here, and we can see this in a lot of different ways. So we can see this as just a cross like this, or we can see it as either an upside down version of Jupiter in the 4th card that we saw, or we could see this as a reference to the planetary sign of Saturn. So you've got 2 ways. So if it's Saturn, it's about that kind of death cycle, that sacrificing cycle, and there is a story of Saturn where he is made impotent by his son Jupiter, which I won't go too far into here because it's a little bit X-rated. But yeah, this idea of sacrifice and impotence due to it, and the idea of kind of being suspended does make him impotent in a way because he's unable to act. If it is an upside down 4, it links it to Jupiter in a way, and Jupiter being kind of like the philosopher king, and that kind of energy of the 4s that we see in the Emperor. And please refer to the Emperor if you would like a bit more of that detail. If we see it as a cross, which is what I want to focus on, we can see this as a symbol of spirit or a symbol of life. The cross is normally kind of a symbol of the overwhelming life. And we can also see here, we can see 2 different triangles here. I'm going to do the one that's most often talked about. So here to the arms, to the head, and back down to the arms. So it's an inverted triangle. I can also see this triangle here, which I'll dot. Yeah. but this isn't very often referenced. So this cross and triangle forms like an upside down alchemical symbol for sulfur. Upside down, this is normally a symbol for the great work, the process of turning lead into gold, or looking for the philosopher's stone. This is a symbol to say that it has been completed, a kind of a victory symbol. We see this upside down triangle as water in the alchemical way that dissolves and breaks things down, and the things that come out of that water is things that is purified and pure. So we have the life or spirit deriving out of the purifying waters, which is the great work. So we can see it like this. We can also see it as an inverted symbol of sulfur, and whereas sulfur is the archaeus, it's the fiery thing in the soul, we can see this as the more watery aspects. So sometimes people call this the symbol of personality, but it can be also the spirit that derives out of the motions of the person. Obviously, like I said, we've got this triangle here, upside down, which also forms it as a square. So we can see this as the spirit deriving out of the square, or the material plane. So the subjugation of the materials, even if it's kind of skewish and as a diamond. So the spirit deriving out of the material. The other way is obviously this fire. So this fire being subjugated by spirit, so the willpower being subjugated by that of the divine or that of the spirit. That's an interesting one, because obviously whilst suspended upside down, you are less able to conduct your will. You are less able to do what you want, and you are less able to exercise your own actions. So that is basically the main ones. Like I said, sometimes these pockets have money dropping out of them, like so, but not in this version. So there you go. Let us look at the version in the Rider-Waite-Smith then, and look at the imagery in the Rider-Waite-Smith. Now, the big one here may be triggering for those of you that are watching that are Jewish or have Jewish hereditary. So if you are, there is a distinction of what I'm trying to say, but it may still be a little bit triggering for you because of World War II. However, for those of you, if you find this chat a little bit triggering, please skip forward a little bit. A. Waite makes reference to the Philfot, which is basically the kind of Anglo-Saxon, very early swastika, which is anti-clockwise. So let me just draw it, and this is where it may be triggering for people of Jewish hereditary, of which, you know, please forward it. So we've got this shape here that he makes reference to it. It's known as the Philfot. Sometimes this is seen as deriving from Feelfoot or 4 foot. Sometimes it's seen as deriving from Philfoot, which means like to fill in the foot of something. And sometimes when this is, they've got stained glass windows, they put this symbol at the bottom just to fill in the design. It is an ancient symbol which seems to crop up in an awful lot of different cultures. Unfortunately, it was used much later than this card was designed. This is 1909, and obviously the swastika was used by the German Nazis in the 1940s. So since then, the meaning and it has been replaced by one of suffering and Holocaust. However, Waite does make a reference to this as this symbol and being hidden in this card. It does have a history of meaning in different cultures, like I said, and in Anglo-Saxon times it was sometimes kind of used to reference to sky gods, sometimes Thor, sometimes that kind of light coming down from heaven in terms of thunder. So those kind of things. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I think I have spent enough time on it. If you are interested in that symbol, you can look it up either under the swastika or under Philifod. But I am recognising that may be a little bit triggering for some audiences. So anyway, moving on. The other thing to note about the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is this tree. So this tree has obviously changed the design from here to here. This is the Tau cross. The Tau cross is a Christian symbol, and it can be kind of seen as a gateway or opening, but it can also be about symbolic death, not actual death. It can be about symbolic death, so the death of part of your soul in order to transform. And this card is one before death, which is normally interpreted as change or transformation. So we can see the Hanged Man almost like a chrysalis, a caterpillar going into a state of chrysalis or pulpae in order to transform later as a butterfly. So Waite was very keen to stress this point, that this is not a physical death or a physical punishment, and he did so by kind of referencing the amount of life on this tree. All these leaves are hinting that it is about life. It's about the transformation and the symbolic death, but in a way that is life affirming and nothing to do with death. He also goes on to say something along the lines of, this card is really tricky to understand and very few people understand it, and it's got deeper meaning and everyone else has kind of interpreted this in vain, but not really talked about his own personal meaning. So go figure. Thank you, Waite. So this is the Tau cross. Some of the ceremonial lodges even used robes that mimicked this shape, and they're called Tau robes. I think the Golden Dawn also use Tau robes, referencing this. It's also part of the Crux Ansata, which I talked about in another video, which is the Tau cross topped with a circle here, and that is about life, death and rebirth. So here we're talking about symbolic death, and the top circle would be the life and the rebirth. Cool, so that is the only other major differences between these two is that they've been flipped. You can see that it's the right leg that's passing behind here, and here the left leg. There's no real reason for that. I imagine Waite probably had a reason because he was quite keen on the right being a very active side of the body and the left being a passive side, which is why he sometimes switched the magician around with his arms. So here the active leg is strapped to the tree, whilst the passive leg is behind. So that is it on the symbolism in the cards. So let us talk about the meanings. So as I said, in terms of Odin, we can see this card as sacrifice. It can be talking about giving something up in order to get something better. So that could be giving up a habit or an old pattern of behaviour in order to transform and transcend above those kind of behaviours. So especially if we are talking about a psychological interpretation of this card, we can talk about breaking patterns of behaviour, and we can talk about breaking habits. That kind of psychological transformation is pretty easy to read in this card, because it is based on that sacrifice. The other thing that we can talk about is one of surrender. This person is putting themselves in that state for their own reasons. So that could be one of sacrifice, but it can also be about surrendering oneself to processes. It's giving one's personal volition and personal actions up in order to gain something. There is something to be gained here. So surrendering to the external influences, it can also be seen as part of that. The other thing that it can be is about suspension, and this is the big one for Tarot de Marseille readers. We are looking at the suspension in time. So we're looking at a pause. This person cannot act, they are suspended. So suspended in time, but I also like to read it as a suspension of beliefs and disbeliefs. So stop what you're doing is a very good meaning of advice for this card. So if this card comes up on the table, the first interpretation that I kind of jump to is something needs to be stopped, something needs to be suspended, and it will normally be something in terms of time or something in terms of beliefs and disbeliefs. The other thing that it can be is about prophecy or divination, and this links it back to that kind of Odin-esque story about kind of snatching up the runes. So it can be about divination and prophecy, and what I kind of think of there is almost like the Delphi of Oracle, with a gap between the rocks, and some noxious fumes are kind of wafting up, and a person that is suspended above them in order to breathe them in. Yes, the details that we have about the Pythonesses of the Delphi, and the way that they suspended was mostly on a seat rather than upside down from the ceiling. But we can also see this as kind of meaning divination or prophecy, especially in kind of a spiritual sense. So if you are doing a reading for a kind of a more spiritual person, it can be talking about prophecy or divination. So those are the kind of general meanings of that card, and that is what I would use instantly to kind of allay someone's fears. So as I said at the start, some people sit down and they will see this card and they will instantly interpret it in a very intuitive way to them, which will normally be around self-punishment, suicide, corporal punishment in some way. And it's quite important just to kind of settle them down in their fears by kind of saying, this card you may interpret in a negative way, however it can mean some positive things, including transformation processes and including the need to take time out as kind of a way of retreat or contemplation. It is the card before transformation, which we see in the Death card. So it is one for preparing for that transformation, preparing to undergo some big or minor changes in what you're doing and how you're doing it. So this is the chrysalis stage of the caterpillar. The caterpillar has munched through its leaves, the big hungry caterpillar, and it is now turned into a chrysalis waiting for that transformation, which will happen on the next card, the Death card, or the Unnamed Arcana if you do Tarot de Marseille. So I hope that has been useful, and it has kind of given you an awful lot to mull over and think about in terms of the Hanged Man and its interpretations. If there has been anything that you feel that I've waffled over or not been too clear about, please put it in the comments below and I'll try and kind of clarify some of my points. For those of you that are my Patreon supporters, thank you so much. It means the world to me, but you will also get a handout, a cheat sheet, if you will, of everything that I've talked about in this video, plus an awful lot more. Those are great for you guys to print out and to write over your notes and to include anything that kind of comes up as you're working with this card. For those of you that aren't part of my Patreon, please consider doing so. For the price of a digital cup of coffee, you keep me in coffee, as well as gain access to some extra videos, some videos on spreads, some extra handouts and documents and astrological tarot stuff, which is quite cool. So with all that said, if you haven't subscribed to my videos, please do so. There should be a button kind of in this corner if you have not done so. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I've hoped it has been useful for you. Next card we will be dealing with is the Death card, or the Unnamed Arcana, so hold on to watch that video. Thank you so much guys, take care, goodbye.